2 Corinthians chapter 6 begins with a portrait of a servant of God, or as the first verse says, a worker together with God. And included in the list of characteristics are the words found in verse 9, as unknown and yet well known. You know, there are many of God's dear servants who have accomplished things by the grace of God that will cause heaven to shine more brightly because of the stars, because of the jewels that are there that have been taken out of the mine of this world. And only heaven will tell their story, truly. Although they may have been known by a few in this world, yet their story has really been lost in history. And it would be good for us to spend a little bit of time mining out these old books of Bible characters, of missionary biographies, and of the history of the church, because it's full of hugely encouraging examples of the workers together with God. And this is Black History Month, and I was doing a little project for some of my friends in prison on some of the great Christians who have served the Lord from various Black communities around the world. And my mind was turned to an old book I have. This is a part of a series that was known as Every Christian's Library. And there was quite a collection of these. And this particular one is called Aids to Believers by Dr. Davis. And he's today largely unknown, although he made a tremendous mark in the world of his day. Dr. Davis was born, Christopher James Davis. He was born in the Barbados, the island of Barbados, 23rd of April, 1842. And he was the youngest of 10 children. And there was a Wesleyan school there, and he attended this school, and he shone. Everyone could see that he was a very special young man. And a medical doctor associated with those known as the Brethren had come to evangelize on the island there and found this young man and encouraged him and actually brought him back to England. And there in England, he was trained as a house physician at St. Bartholomew's Hospital in London. Eventually went to Aberdeen University, graduated with his MD, and during his off time, he evangelized. He preached in the open air. He preached to large audiences. He was a very articulate man, very articulate preacher of the gospel. And he would also provide free medical services for the poor there in Aberdeen. And then, still a relatively young man, the Franco-Prussian War broke out in the 1870s. And this was a war in which Prussia was gaining ground, going to gather the Germanic areas that were to the south of France, and also hopefully align with Spain. And France was concerned that they were going to be surrounded on all sides by the Prussian Empire. And so a war was fought between the French and the Prussians. And some of the great battles were fought up on the Belgian border, 80 miles northeast of Paris, in an area called Sedan. And one of the most famous was the Battle of Sedan. Well, the doctor heard about the horrible suffering that was going on in that part of the world. People who were starving to death, people who were dying of dysentery and other diseases, and the wounded from the war. And so he made his way at his own expense. He traveled to this region. The peasantry were suffering from cholera and starvation. And he set up soup kitchens in various areas. He ran an ambulance service. and he provided free medical help to both sides of the war, both the French and the Belgians, who were fighting right on the border in that region. He became known as le bon Docteur Noir, the good black doctor. And they said that people would just reach out to touch him. He radiated the light of heaven. When he came into a tent of suffering, he would bring such a joy and encouragement, and the people loved this dear man. And yet, he contracted smallpox himself at the age of 28, and on November 27th of 1870, he passed into the presence of the Lord. He was buried there in a little graveyard just outside of Sedan in France. There are wonderful things said about him, but one of the most interesting things was that his funeral was attended by French, German, English, and Prussian military leaders. And the mayor of the city opened the gates of the city. He gave the funeral oration in honor of this young doctor who had come and given his life for the cause. Before he died, he wrote several books, and this is one of them, called Aids to Believers. Quite an unusual book. I think it went through maybe 18 editions. And as I was looking at my own copy here, which came from a library, H.K. Downey's library, I added it to my collection a very long time ago. But as I was perusing it, I came across a little paper, and this little paper is actually a tract written by A.T. Schofield. Now, A.T. Schofield was also a medical doctor, the well-known Harley Street physician. And he tells how just the week before Dr. Davis died, he wrote this in a letter, this incident, in a letter to Dr. Schofield. And so Schofield published the story, and I'm just going to read it to you. The doctor had left, seeing the desperate need there, he had left France, come back to England, traveled all the way up to Aberdeen, and along the way he had pled for funds so that food could be purchased and medical supplies for the people. In fact, the story is told that on one occasion, when they had run out of food in one of the soup kitchens, he reached into his pocket and he pulled out a gold watch that he had received as an award at medical school, and he handed it over to them to sell so that they might buy food for the poor. So it was on this last trip, as he made his way down to the coast to take the ferry back across to France and to pass into the presence of the Lord within a week, that this incident occurred. So he tells the story. At Charing Cross, a railway station, as he walked along the platform, he found a carriage where there was as he says, a little old lady with very bright eyes, busily engaged in knitting. Next to her was her somewhat stolid and burly husband. In the far corner, a gentleman sat reading the Times, while at Dr. Davis's side were two elderly and prim ladies. So the doctor had been tired. He was exhausted from all of his work, and he put on a hat, a dark velvet smoking cap, it's called, whose blue tassel and gold embroidery gave him a striking appearance. He leaned back in the seat and with closed eyes heard the following conversation. The little lady who was knitting turned to her husband and said, "What a handsome man, John." "Hush, my dear, he may hear what you say." "And what if he does?" she said. "He can't understand a single word." "Don't be too sure of that." "Oh, John, can't you see who he is?" "Well, no, my dear, I can't say I do." "Why, he's one of those African princes you read about that have come over to see the Queen." "You can't be sure of that, my dear," said John feebly. "I tell you," she said, "he's an African prince." "Isn't it awful, John, to think that the poor heathen is now leaving this country and probably doesn't even know he's got a soul? I call it disgraceful." All right, they were making their way down to the harbor to travel to France. "Well, you can't help it, my dear," said John soothingly. "Can't I?" replied the lady with spirit. "I'd soon let him know if I could speak his language. It's dreadful to think of." John grunted, and the lady resumed her knitting with a sigh, for she had a kind heart. Just then the train was passing the Crystal Palace on the right. Its panes of glass were shining like diamonds in the afternoon sun. The gentleman behind the Times began, "Wonderful building, that. How fine it looks. I hear it's full of students each evening. What advantages our young people have now. There was nothing like it in my school life. Young men and women have much to be thankful for today." The little lady replied, "I'm not so sure of that. I don't see that children now are any better than we were. Indeed, in many respects, they're worse. These huge places of amusement do a lot of harm. Boys and girls do pretty much as they like now, while as for morality, the less said the better." Dr. Davis saw his opportunity, and in the purest English said, as he slowly opened his eyes and leaned forward, "Morality, madam?" The little lady nearly had a fit. She sprang right off her seat, and as she came down again said faintly, "Oh, sir, I'm so sorry. I'd no idea you understood our language. I don't know what you must think of me." "I think you said morality, ma'am," replied Dr. Davis. "Yes, sir, I did. And what is morality, ma'am?" "Morality, sir, is a very good thing. We couldn't do without it, could we, John?" "Well, no, my dear, I don't think we could. At any rate, sir, we're not going to try. Morality, sir, is a very good thing for both worlds," added his wife. "For both worlds?" he inquired. "For both worlds, sir. There's another beside ours. Indeed, there are two. One is called heaven, and the other is called hell." "And what are they like, ma'am?" "Heaven, sir," replied the woman, delighted that she now actually got into conversation with the African prince, "is where the angels are, and where all the good people go. All gold and glass and harps and happiness. And hell, sir, is where the devil is, and is a dreadful place where all the bad and wicked people go. All flames and horrid darkness, and we must go to one or the other when we die." The African prince leaned forward full of interest. "And how can we get to heaven, ma'am?" "Well, sir," said the little lady with a triumphant look at John, "it's quite easy. Of course you must be good and kind to all and forgive everyone their offenses. And you must be baptized and sorry for your sins and go to church and take the sacrament and love your enemies. Help the poor and do as you would have done by, and that's the way to heaven. Isn't it, John?" "Quite right, my dear." And then in a low voice, "But if you go on with this conversation, you're sure to get in a mess." And then to Dr. Davis, who was still politely listening, "I might say, sir, if you wish any further information on these matters, we have a most excellent clergyman at Folkestone who will tell you all you wish to know. I can give you his address." "Sir," replied the black doctor, "we are traveling at 50 miles an hour, and I should like to be sure now of the way to heaven." "Well, sir," interposed the little lady, rather piqued, "haven't I just told you word for word, just as it's written in the Bible?" "The Bible, ma'am?" "The Bible, sir. The Bible is God's book, written to tell us the way to heaven. You'll find it all there exactly as I've said, and of course as my husband told you. If you would like to see our clergyman, you will find he knows all about it as well." "Oh, ma'am," said the doctor, "I should very much like to see it in the Bible." "And so you shall, sir," replied the little lady, who proceeded to hunt in her bag. After she had rummaged in it for some time without success, she turned to the unsympathetic John. Have you got a Bible anywhere?" "No, my dear, I haven't, and you had much better leave the gentleman alone." Nothing, however, could daunt the lady's missionary zeal. "Excuse me, sir," addressing the gentleman in the corner, "have you a Bible?" "No, I have not, ma'am, and I consider these religious conversations in railway carriages most improper." "Have you a Bible?" pursued the little lady, nothing daunted, turning to the two spinster ladies in turn. "No," replied each one in succession. "I'm afraid we have not." "Dear me," said the little lady, "I fear, sir, we haven't a Bible in the carriage. I'm so sorry. But I've told you word for word the way to heaven, and as John, my husband, says, sir, our vicar will be most pleased to see you at Folkestone." "I wish I could see the passage now," said Dr. Davis with a sigh, as he leaned back again and closed his eyes. The little lady gazed for a time earnestly at her hearer, and then she gave a little sigh as she took up her knitting once more and retired from the mission field. There was a silence once more in the carriage as the train roared through the dusk of the evening. After a while, Dr. Davis slowly felt in his coat pocket and drew out a small book. Leaning forward once more and holding it out, he said to the lady, "Was that what you were looking for?" "Oh, dear, yes, sir. Why, that's the Testament, the very book." "The Testament, ma'am?" "Yes, sir, the Bible has two testaments. There's the Old Testament and the New." "And which is this, ma'am?" "This, sir, is the New." "And which tells us the way to heaven?" "Why, the New, sir. That's the very book." "Would you kindly show me the passage you spoke of, ma'am?" "With pleasure, sir," said the lady, bright again with missionary zeal, taking the book in her hand. She then rapidly turned its pages, first one way and then the other, then, after casting her gaze on the ceiling for inspiration, turned them over again, the doctor's eyes being fixed on her all the time. After fumbling in vain for some minutes and getting very red, she turned to her husband. "John?" "Yes, my dear." "Do you know where that passage is that tells us the way to heaven?" "No, I don't, Maria. And you see what a mess you've got into? I haven't the least idea where it is." In despair, the lady rapidly turned over the pages once more, but all in vain. "I'm afraid, sir, I can't lay my hands on the exact passage. I know it's just about here. My poor head is not so young as it once was, and I can't think of the verse. But it's all there, sir, exactly as I told you, for I know it by heart." "Would you allow me, ma'am," said Dr. Davis very politely, gently taking the Testament out of her hands and turning the leaves over to the Gospel of John, chapter 3, verse 16, which he indicated with his finger. "Was that the passage?" "Oh, dear, yes, sir. Why, they are the very words, just as I said. Now, sir, you can read it for yourself and see it's all true." And she lay back triumphantly. "Would you allow me to read this passage aloud, ma'am?" "Certainly, sir, do." So Dr. Davis read, "For God so loved the world, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life." "There, sir," said the lady in high spirits, and evidently without any suspicion of the storm about to burst. "The very words I told you. I'm so glad you found it. I knew it was there." One moment, ma'am. I should first like to say a word to the gentleman in the corner. Sir, I don't know who you are or what you call yourself, but of one thing I am sure. The man that says that a British railway carriage is not a place where a supposed heathen, which I thank God I am not, may learn the way to heaven, is unworthy of the name of Englishman. The little lady quietly applauded. "But as for you, ma'am," he continued, "you are 10 times worse. I came into this carriage, and you believed me to be a heathen prince, and seemed anxious to tell me the way to heaven. So I asked you, and you told me I had to do this and that and the other, and you've never opened your mouth to tell me one word of what Christ has done for me. Not one syllable of all you told me is to be found in this glorious text, and no word that it contains has passed your lips. You have utterly misled me. Your religion is 2 letters short. It is D-O, do, and mine is D-O-N-E, done, and that makes all the difference." The poor missionary collapsed, while the supposed heathen proclaimed the glorious gospel of the cross to a now attentive audience until the train drew up at Folkestone Harbor Station. On his way to the boat in his mackintosh, for a fine rain was falling, Dr. Davis felt a slight tug at his overcoat. Turning round, he found the 2 spinster ladies at his heels. "Oh, sir," said the one who had given the pull, "you will excuse us, but we could not let you go without thanking you for the blessing your words have been to us. We always thought we had to do our best to get to heaven, and never understood that our Savior Jesus Christ has done all the work for us, and that we can now know that we are saved. Sir," she continued, her eyes full of tears, "we shall have to thank God for all eternity for this afternoon." Schofield concludes, in a week, Dr. Davis himself had passed away into his eternal rest. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of the good black doctor. As unknown and yet well known